Former South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has been sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was found guilty on charges including destroying potential criminal evidence and fabricating official documents in relation to his failed declaration of martial law in 2024. This is the first court ruling in a series of criminal charges that include abuse of power and insurrection. Prosecutors are calling for the death penalty on those charges, with that ruling scheduled for February. On the 3rd of December, President Yoon declared that martial law, the decree, deployed troops and triggered nationwide turmoil. But 6 hours later, the martial law was overturned by parliamentary action. The National Assembly went on to impeach Yoon on December 14. The Constitutional Court unanimously upheld the impeachment on April 4 and removed Yoon from office. In June, Lee Jae-myung was elected president in a snap election. For more on all of this, let's cross live to Jack Barton, who's outside the court in Seoul. And Jack, a sentence of 5 years. How has Yoon reacted to the news?
Well, Yoon's just been taken away in a bus from the courthouse back to detention. Obviously, this is not good news for Yoon, but as we saw with his supporters outside, the reaction was one of disappointment mixed with a little bit of relief, perhaps, because this was only half of the sentence that the prosecutors had been demanding. So of all the charges there, the judge finding him guilty, but on the actual sentencing showing him more leniency, perhaps, than the prosecution had expected. And this may certainly feed into these other trials, 8 in total that you mentioned, stemming from his time in office, as well as his declaration of martial law, and that big one coming up in February, where the prosecution have been asking for the death sentence. Now, a death sentence hasn't been carried out in South Korea for decades. But they're saying if the death sentence isn't carried out, at the very minimum, there has to be a life in prison. So there is an indication that while the court is definitely finding Yoon guilty on all the charges that have been presented so far, the sentencing is lighter, certainly much lighter than the prosecution would have liked.
Yeah. Jack, all of this, the South Korea has a history of political upheaval. So how is this latest saga being received publicly?
In the public stride, as you mentioned, I mean, we've had half a dozen democratically elected leaders sort of imprisoned for various charges or impeached while they were in office, not just Yoon Suk Yeol, but the last time his power was in party, it was Park Geun-hye. She too was impeached, she was imprisoned, and she was pardoned by Yoon when he came into office. But it does have this history of turmoil going right back to the time of dictatorship, and even some of those military leaders ending up on trial. So it is, in a sense, South Koreans are taking it in their stride, but it also feeds into a basic dynamic here that I hear from so many people in the middle. The fact that the right-wing party, Yoon's party, which is still there, the People Power Party, is so entrenched with that past linked to the dictatorship, but the current party, the Democratic Party, still very much, even when it's in office, spends a lot of its energy attacking the opposition party, essentially acting like an opposition party, acting in many ways like the student movement out of which it arose. And so even when we saw on the first anniversary, President Lee Jae-myung talking about putting this behind, about history not repeating itself, I think many people were wondering, how will history not repeat itself when this dynamic is still in place, which has led to, so much political turmoil in South Korea's past and continues to create turmoil.
Jack, thank you so much for the update. Jack Barton joining us from Seoul.